The UN supports regional organizations in different ways. The collaboration between regional organizations varies. Sometimes the UN's in the lead of a mediation process and the regional organization may be in a support role. Sometimes there may be a joint mediation with the UN and a regional organization. Sometimes the regional organization might have the lead and the UN is playing a support role, and that's really what this question is about. And we can provide sometimes technical support. We're doing this currently with the OSCE in Ukraine, and we've had a number of deployments, I think 3, giving support to their monitors about the ceasefire and lessons learned on how to strengthen their monitoring process. We've also given ceasefire support to IGAD on the South Sudan process, and clearly in the breakdown there's going to be more support needed. So sometimes it can be very technical support in an actual process, or be part of a group of friends around a process and sort of providing that kind of assistance. We're also helping the AU in the DRC at the moment around the national dialogue and giving support on the political ideas around designing a national dialogue potentially there. But that support in a specific mediation process, or examples of those kind of support. ECOWAS is coming soon, a delegation of 7 to visit MSU, our mediation support unit in New York, to look at how we do mediation support and think through how they would do mediation support relevant for their own setting. And that we've done the same with the AU and with the OAS as well. We've had an exchange with the OAS where one of their staff spent time with us, as well as the OIC and different organizations. So it's a combination of support in an immediate mediation setting and then building up their capacity and the ideas that they play with when they're doing mediation support. It's hard to talk. There's so many challenges in process design, and that's what makes it so fascinating. But I'll pick out 3 big challenges I see at the moment. One is we're seeing increasingly multiplicity of parties. It's not a question of 2 actors, 2 conflict parties sitting together, but a multiplicity of different parties you're having to balance in the process, and they each have their own backers and entry points of leverage. And then those parties are also becoming fragmented as well, and the fragmentation of the parties changes the center of gravity in who you're engaging with, and you can see a shift between hardliners and maybe moderate voices. So that's a challenge, how to encompass that. And linked with that is the kind of concentric circles that you see developing around these actors. So you're trying to work at the local, the national level, but you also have to think about the regional level and then the international level, particularly if we're talking something like Syria. And then there's the interconnectivity between different crises and how they impact on each other. And sometimes if ground is given in one setting, it means that a harder line is taken somewhere else, and it can reduce the room for maneuver. But I think designing a process where you can include all these different actors, but also be conscious of the pressure points of who actually holds the leverage and who can change the situation on the ground, but also include those other voices to make a process more inclusive and representative. It's a real challenge of how to design a process that can address that kind of complexity. That's one thing, the multiplicity of actors and fragmentation. I think linked to that is the issue of agenda setting. That's always a challenge, especially as you have multiple actors. It's how do you set the agenda and the connectivity between different issues and the sequencing of different issues. Often you find governments that security is the most important aspect for them, whereas rebel groups, opposition groups might want certain guarantees around democracy and a change in government before there's discussion about security issues. And then there's the deeper issues about addressing conflict in a country, and setting that agenda where you can get the groups to actually talk with each other or even agree on the agenda is a real challenge in processes. And it becomes more challenging as you have more actors and the issues you need to unpack the issues, but the issues increase as well. It's the second one. I think a third challenge is with the levels of violence that we're seeing, the intensity in violence, put such a pressure to do something, to make a difference, to make the violence stop, that humanitarian imperative. it's very difficult to have the time needed for mediation processes, and sometimes the exploration that's needed with different actors to get to the root of the problem, really tease out and be creative on different solutions, because there's such a need, such a pressure, both because of the high levels of casualties, but as the violence continues, then the animosity becomes more and more ingrained and makes it harder to find kind of solutions for different that will be amenable to the different actors involved. And particularly, I think that's a challenge for the UN, because very much the work we do in crises like Yemen or Syria, Libya, it's very much in the spotlight, it's very much reporting back to the Security Council what's happened and needing to show movement. And a lot of the times it's the more quiet engagements that happen perhaps at the technical level, where you really explore ideas and find entry points. But that needs a bit more of a quiet space, needs a bit more of a protected space to happen. And it's very difficult when there's a spotlight and the need for a real response to a crisis. And we see that now again with the flare-up in South Sudan. It's critical to protect the mediation space for a mediator to be able to engage with any actor necessary to resolve the conflict and find a political solution. The question of who and how that is done is one of the strategy, the broader political strategy, and the goal of engaging with a particular actor. It's not necessarily the case of bringing a listed organization to the table. It might be having a back channel to influence their behavior, understand their behavior, find an entry point. Sometimes you need to talk with them for humanitarian reasons and access. Sometimes it's trying to understand how you can bring them on board of the political process. There isn't actually, international law does not prevent you from talking to these actors, but if a group is listed, there's sanctions against them, it can complicate the manner in which you do it in terms of being able to travel them. But it doesn't prohibit having that channel, it just makes it increases the level of scrutiny and the need for a real political strategy and clear goals of what you're trying to achieve in engaging with them. And part of that as well is the sensitivity of other groups, and particularly the member states, of how they feel if by engaging with that group you're conveying a degree of legitimacy or recognition, which is very difficult in the context of violent activities by some listed organizations or terrorist organizations. Fundamentally, it's a question of the political strategy, working with respect for the limitations that come with sanctions, if there are sanctions, and conscious of the sensitivities of certain member states and who you engage with, as well as other actors. But it's about having a political strategy and not excluding any actor for a reason of international law if they're necessary to find a political solution.